He raised the abandoned predator cub, unaware it belonged to a galactic empress. The proximity alarm on the perimeter of the geodesic habitat did not scream, it pulsed, a low rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floor plates of the hydroponics bay. Jasper looked up from the nutrient manifold he was calibrating, his warm brown eyes narrowing slightly, crinkling the fine lines of weathering at their corners. He ran a hand through his short salt and pepper hair, the bristle of his beard stubble scratching against his palm, a nervous habit developed over 3 years of solitude on the moon of Ethon. He wasn't a soldier, though his broad shoulders and the way he filled out his worn, gray, hooded sweatshirt suggested a man capable of bearing heavy loads. He was a healer, a xeno-veterinarian who had traded the politics of the core worlds for the honest, brutal simplicity of a frontier quarantine zone. He grabbed his pack, slinging the dark strap over one shoulder, and moved toward the airlock. The storm outside was a violent bruise against the dark sky, but the sensor ghost was distinct. Something small, biological, and dying was huddled in the lee of the comms array. Jasper cycled the lock, the hiss of atmosphere replacement sharp in his ears. When he found it, half buried in the silica dust, his heart hammered a heavy, human rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't the reptilian scavenger he expected. It was a cub, a ball of soft gray and white fur that looked deceptively like a Terran feline, though the bone structure was denser, heavier. It looked up at him with enormous, innocent blue eyes that held a depth of intelligence no animal should possess. It didn't hiss. It shivered. Jasper scooped it up, his large, calloused hands encompassing the creature's entire torso. The cub let out a mewling sound and buried its face in the rough cotton of his hoodie, seeking warmth. "I've got you," Jasper murmured, his voice a low rumble. He didn't know he was holding the genetic future of the Viridian Dominion. He only knew that the fragile heartbeat against his palm needed to be stronger. He spent the next 6 hours in the medical bay, his world reduced to the vital monitor and the soft gray fur under his fingers. The cub, a ktess, a species whispered about in hushed tones in the academy, had been poisoned, its metabolic enzymes crashing. Jasper worked with the intuitive, tactile focus of a human medic, bypassing the automated diagnostic tables that were failing to read the creature's unique biology. He used saline, synthesized glucose, and his own body heat, holding the cub against his chest, wrapping it in the folds of his gray sweatshirt to stabilize its temperature. When the cub finally slept, its breathing evening out, Jasper slumped back in his chair, the exhaustion settling into his bones. He caught his reflection in the dark monitor, a tired Caucasian man with a scruffy beard and a hoodie, looking nothing like a hero. Then the proximity alarm triggered again. This time it wasn't a pulse, it was a scream. A massive, silent shadow had blotted out the stars above his dome. The airlock breached with a sound like tearing metal. Jasper stood his ground, placing himself physically between the medical stasis box and the door. The figure that entered sucked the oxygen out of the room, not literally, but with a sheer, overwhelming presence. It was a one, but to call her that felt like a reduction. She was tall, her skin a stunning, vibrant purple that seemed to possess a bioluminescent sheen in the low light. Patterns of glowing pink and magenta dots traced intricate constellations across her forehead and cheeks, pulsing with a bioelectric rhythm. She wore an elaborate headdress, a fusion of organic bone and polished metal embedded with gems that shimmered like captured nebulas, framing a face of sharp, ethereal beauty. Her ears were pointed, elongated, twitching with agitation, and long tendrils of blue and purple hair fell like braided ropes behind her shoulders. "Step away from the asset," she commanded. Her voice was melodic but edged with steel, vibrating with an imperious resonance. Her large, expressive blue eyes, so similar to the cub's, burned with a cold, terrifying fire. Jasper didn't flinch. He crossed his arms over his chest, the gray cotton of his sleeves bunching over his forearms. He said, "It's not an asset," he said, his voice calm, contrasting the alien intensity before him. "It's a patient, and it's sleeping. You're going to wake him up." The Empress V'lira froze. She had expected fear, or perhaps the groveling supplication typical of the fringe species when faced with Viridian royalty. She did not expect a human male in casual work clothes to scold her for volume control. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and predatory, the glowing pink lines on her face flaring brighter with her rising temper. "I am V'lira, Empress of the Viridian Dominion. That creature is my blood heir. You have touched it. The penalty for handling the royal Cattess is death." "The penalty for leaving a cub to die in an ion storm should be worse," Jasper countered, his brown eyes locking onto her blue ones. He saw the flicker of shock in her gaze. He stepped aside slightly, not to yield, but to allow her to see the monitor. He was poisoned, targeted biocorrosion. If I hadn't filtered his blood manually, he'd be dead. Your royal Cattess is alive because I know how to fix things your automated systems can't. V'lira looked at the cub, then back at Jasper. She took in the texture of his skin, the visible pores and fine lines around his eyes that marked him as organic, flawed, and terrifyingly real. She looked at the cheap gray fabric covering his chest where the cub had recently slept. She realized with a jolt that the cub was calm, calmer than it had ever been in the imperial creche. "Poisoned?" she whispered, the bioluminescence on her cheeks dimming to a soft, worried violet. "By someone who knew his biology," Jasper said, his voice softening. He saw the crack in her armor, the mother beneath the Empress. "I can save him, V'lira, but you need to let me work. And you need to stop threatening to kill the only doctor on this moon who knows how to treat him." The standoff was broken by the planet itself. Aethon's atmosphere, unstable on the best of days, convulsed. A warning siren blared, a Category 5 ion maelstrom. The magnetic shielding of the habitat groaned. "Your ship," Jasper barked, shifting instantly from adversary to survivalist. "It's holding orbit," V'lira said, her regal composure slipping as the floor tilted. "Then it's gone," Jasper said grimly. "The storm scramble will force it to the outer beacon. You're stuck here." He moved past her, his shoulder brushing against her arm, a shock of warmth against her cool, smooth, purple skin. He didn't apologize. He went straight to the environmental controls, his horns moving with practiced speed over the manual overrides. V'lira watched him, fascinated despite the danger. He possessed no exoskeleton, no cybernetic enhancements, just bone and muscle and a salt and pepper determination that seemed to anchor the entire shaking room. She was the most powerful woman in the galaxy, yet in this rattling metal box, she was entirely dependent on a man in a hoodie. The storm raged for 2 days. The confinement forced an intimacy that shattered protocols. V'lira sat by the medical unit, her elaborate headdress cast aside on a workbench, her blue-purple tendrils loose. She watched Jasper work. He was tireless. He fed the cub with a dropper, his large, rough hands incredibly gentle as he stroked the soft gray fur. The cub, conscious now, purred a low, vibrating sound that resonated in V'lira's own chest. "Why does he trust you?" V'lira asked on the second night. The pink dots on her face glowed softly, casting a magenta light on Jasper's profile. Jasper looked up, rubbing the stubble on his jaw. "Because I listened to him. He was in pain, and I didn't ask for his rank. I just stopped the pain. He looked at her, really looked at her, past the alien features and the glowing skin. Why was he out there alone, V'lira? Who wants your heir dead? V'lira looked away, her blue eyes darkening. My court is complicated. Logic dictates the strongest lineage rules. Someone calculated that removing him would destabilize my reign. That's not logic, Jasper said, standing up and stretching, the hem of his sweatshirt lifting slightly. That's cruelty masquerading as math. He walked over to her, handing her a mug of synthesized tea. Drink, you're running on adrenaline. It'll crash your system. She took the mug, her fingers brushing his. His skin was hot, dry and textured. Hers was cool and smooth as polished obsidian. The contrast sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. You are insolent, she murmured, but she drank. I'm honest, Jasper corrected. Human trait gets us in trouble. It is refreshing, she admitted. The silence between them grew heavy, not with threat, but with a sudden localized gravity. She watched the way he moved, not with the liquid grace of her people, but with a solid, planted weight. He was a creature of gravity and earth, and she found herself wanting to be grounded. The turning point came when the cub began to seize. The biopoison had mutated. Alarm shrieked. V'lira froze, her advanced medical knowledge useless against the chaotic progression. Jasper didn't. He moved with a blur of motion, grabbing a syringe and a stabilizing agent. Hold him, he ordered V'lira. Hold him down now. She obeyed without thinking, pinning the thrashing gray form to the table with her purple hands. Jasper located the vein in the cub's neck, his brow furrowed, sweat beading on his forehead. He injected the serum, then immediately placed his hands over the cub's chest, feeling for the rhythm. Come on, he whispered, his face inches from the cub's The seizure stopped. The cub limped, then took a deep, rattling breath. Jasper exhaled, his shoulders slumping. He looked at V'lira, and in the adrenaline crash, they were just two parents fighting for a life. V'lira leaned forward, her forehead resting against his, the glowing pink patterns on her skin illuminating his face. It was a gesture of profound gratitude, bordering on intimacy. You saved him, she breathed, her breath cool against his skin. We saved him, Jasper whispered back. His brown eyes searched hers, and for a moment the galaxy outside didn't exist. There was only the heat of his body, the cool luminescence of hers, and the shared beat of survival. He reached up, his hand hesitating before cupping her cheek. The texture of her skin was unlike anything he'd felt, firm yet yielding, buzzing with faint bioenergy. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut, the predatory edge of her nature softening into something yearning. The moment shattered when the proximity sensor screened a tactical alert. Not the storm, Jasper said, his voice instantly hardening. He pulled away, checking the screen. Signatures. 3 of them. Heavy assault gear. V'lira's face hardened, the mask of the Empress slamming back into place. The assassins. They tracked the signal. They're breaching the airlock, Jasper said, grabbing a heavy wrench and his pack. They assume we're helpless. They assume you're trapped and I'm soft. They are Viridian death commandos, V'lira warned, her hands glowing with summoned biotic energy. They are genetically engineered for slaughter. Good, Jasper said, pulling his hood up, his face cast in shadow. Then they won't expect a human engineer in the dark. He killed the lights. The habitat plunged into blackness, lit only by the emergency strobes and the bioluminescence of V'lira's markings. Jasper moved her and the cub into the service tunnels under the floor grating. Stay here. Guard the cub. I can fight, V'lira hissed. I know, Jasper said, gripping her shoulder. But if they see you, they'll fire on the cub to distract you. Let me be the distraction. He disappeared into the dark. V'lira watched through the grate, clutching the cub, the white-whiskered creature now awake and alert, to her chest. She saw the commandos enter, their armor bulky, their helmet scanner sweeping the room. They moved with mechanical precision. Then, she saw Jasper. He didn't engage them head-on. He was a ghost in the gray hoodie. He dropped from the upper gantry onto the first commando, not with a weapon, but with a high-voltage cable he'd severed. He jammed the live wire into the commando's neck seal. The suit shorted in a shower of sparks, and the figure crumpled. The other two spun, firing kinetic bolts that tore through the machinery. Jasper was already moving, rolling behind a generator. He used the environment, venting steam to blind them, throwing tools to create sound decoys. He was slower than them, weaker than them, but possessed a terrifying adaptability. He tackled the second commando, using his own body weight and a mastery of leverage to drive the alien's helmet into a structural strut. The visor cracked. The atmosphere rushed out. The leader, a massive brute, caught Jasper with a backhand blow that sent him flying across the room. Jasper hit the wall, sliding down, blood trickling from his lip into his salt and pepper beard. The commando raised a rifle for the kill shot. V'lira screamed biotic warning, but Jasper didn't need it. He didn't try to stand. He kicked the release lever of the hydraulic lift the commando was standing on. The floor dropped away. As the commando fell, firing wildly, Jasper scrambled up, grabbing the discarded rifle. He didn't know how to aim the alien weapon, so he didn't try. He swung it like a club, bringing the stock down on the climbing commando's hands, then his head, again and again with a primal, roaring fury that shook V'lira to her core. Silence fell. Jasper stood over the fallen assassins, chest heaving, his gray hoodie torn and stained with blood, his and theirs. He looked wild, dangerous, and utterly magnificent. V'lira emerged from the floor, the cub in her arms. She looked at the carnage, then at the man. She realized then that her empire had underestimated humanity. They mistook softness for weakness. They didn't understand that the capacity to nurture created the capacity for the most violent protection. She walked to him. Jasper dropped the broken rifle, his hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling.
"I'll live," he grunted, wiping his mouth. Is he safe?" V'lira looked down at the cub, then up at Jasper. The cub reached out a paw toward Jasper, mewling. "He is safe," she said, "because of you." She closed the distance, dropping the cub gently into a padded chair before turning back to Jasper. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic thunder of his heart. "You fought without armor. You fought without biotic gifts. You fought for a child that isn't yours." "He's mine now," Jasper said, his voice hoarse, "and I wasn't going to let them touch you." The admission hung in the air. V'lira's eyes widened. She saw the truth in his warm brown eyes. He wasn't a subject. He wasn't a servant. He was a king in his own right, ruling a kingdom of one, willing to burn the world to protect what he loved. She kissed him. It wasn't the tentative touch of earlier. It was fierce, claiming, a collision of two worlds. Her lips were cool, his were hot and tasted of iron and salt. She felt the stubble of his beard against her smooth skin, a friction that ignited nerves she didn't know she had. She pressed him back against the bulkhead, her hands tangling in his hair, her glowing markings pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Jasper groaned low in his throat, his hands finding the curve of her waist, pulling her flush against him. The difference in their physiology, his dense, hard muscle, her lithe, energetic strength, created a friction that was intoxicating. "You are my consort," she whispered against his lips, not asking, but declaring. You will not stay on this rock. You will come to Viridia. You will teach my guard how to fight like a human. You will teach my doctors how to heal like a human. And the cub? Jasper asked, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. He needs his father, V'lira said, a soft smile curving her lips, transforming her alien face into something breathtakingly warm. And I need this. I need you. The rescue fleet arrived 6 hours later. They found the assassins dead and the Empress sitting on the floor of the medical bay, the human male asleep with his head on her shoulder, the royal heir curled up in his lap, purring. When they boarded the flagship, Jasper walked at V'lira's side, not behind her. He wore a new uniform, tailored to his human frame, but bearing the insignia of the royal house. Yet he kept the gray hoodie tied around his waist, a reminder. The cub, now named Orion by Jasper, refused to be held by anyone else. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the quarantine moon behind, V'lira watched Jasper looking out at the stars, his hand resting on the cub's head. She saw the way her crew looked at him, with confusion, yes, but also with a dawning awe. He had no claws, no venom, no armor, but he had defeated death twice, once with medicine and once with rage. "What are you thinking?" she asked, coming up beside him, her arm slipping through his. Jasper smiled, that gentle, crinkling smile from the image, warm and grounding. "I'm thinking I'm going to need a bigger litter box." V'lira laughed, a sound that startled her bridge crew. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her glowing cheek resting against the rough fabric of his shirt. The galaxy was vast and cold and full of enemies, but for the first time in her long life, the Empress wasn't afraid. She had the heart of the maelstrom beside her, and he had claws of his own. 3 standard years blurred into the history of the Viridian Dominion, marked not by galactic conquest or technological leaps, but by an unsettling, profound stability. Jasper's influence, initially met with rigid skepticism, had permeated the cold, logical structures of the empire like a vital, necessary heat. He held the official title of Consort, but the court referred to him, often with a shuddering, reluctant respect, as the heart of stability. His personal domain, established on the highest floor of the imperial palace, was a jarring fusion of 2 worlds. Automated doors carved from black obsidian opened not to sterile chrome, but to a vast sunlit space filled with earth-sourced hydroponics and the earthy, rich scent of living soil. In the center of the room, on a custom-built, low-slung couch designed to support his growing weight, lay Orion, the Cattess heir. The cub was no longer a fragile infant. He was a sleek, formidable juvenile, now the size of a large earth panther, his gray and white fur impossibly soft, his massive blue eyes constantly tracking Jasper's movements. Jasper, still favoring a simple, dark utility shirt beneath the ceremonial sash of his rank, knelt beside a raised garden bed, examining a hybridized earth orchid. He carried the weight of the Empire's future lightly, his brown eyes, crinkled by 3 years of constant focus, retaining that essential grounded patience V'lira had first witnessed on Aethan. A chime announced V'lira's arrival. She entered, not in battle gear, but in the flowing, shimmering robes of her sovereign duty. She was returning from the Senate. Her face, the sharp, elegant cheekbones, the severe line of her lips, etched with the exhausting complexities of governance. The delicate, glowing pink and magenta patterns on her purple skin were muted, a sign of her fatigue. The Xenon Treaty passed.
she announced, her voice clipped, crossing the room to stand behind Jasper. It took 7 hours to convince them that trust, not orbital defense, was the cheaper currency. Jasper stood, turning to face her. He reached out, his warm, rough hands gently cupping her face. He used the warmth of his touch to bypass the layers of stress she carried. Trust is free, my Empress. That's the hard part for them to grasp. V'lira leaned into his hands, her large blue eyes closing briefly in pure acceptance. The contrast was a constant, comforting shock. The solidity of his human mass, the warmth of his skin against the coolness of hers. You are the only thing that is purely real in this galaxy. You are not protocol. You are sensation. You are strength without armor, and passion without calculation. She pulled him close, her cool body pressed against his human heat, their energies a conflicting yet necessary blend. He kissed her, his embrace a grounding force that allowed her to finally relinquish the control she maintained for the entire empire. He had taught her that vulnerability was the ultimate strength, and in their shared moments, she accepted that truth, finding release not in dominance, but in the trusted, unyielding protection of his love. The true symbol of their unified future was Orion. One evening, a rogue political faction attempted a remote sensor hack, trying to destabilize the palace power grid. Before the alarms even sounded, Orion, now weighing nearly 100 kilograms and possessing immense physical power, stood instantly in between the threat source and his parents. He didn't use the biotic abilities of his lineage. He stood, unmoving, his massive body a dark, scaled shield, his fierce blue eyes locked on the digital disturbance. He reacted with the immediate protective loyalty of a bonded pack animal, an action V'lira recognized as purely human in its protective instinct. Jasper placed a hand on Orion's head, then on V'lira's shoulder, securing his family. The threat was neutralized not by technology, but by the cub's unwavering human-taught devotion. They stood on the highest palace balcony that night, overlooking the vast, glittering capital. Orion had curled up beside Jasper's feet. V'lira linked her arm through her consort's, her head resting on his shoulder. When I found you on Aethan, I was seeking a single life. I found a whole new way to survive. I found the truth of strength.